All of this.
The sheep is about to hit the fan. We are talking Mary Had a Little Lamb. And of course, it's another nursery rhyme turned into a horror movie. It can only mean one thing. This must be a movie produced by Scott Jeffrey. And you'd be right. Of course, the prolific producer of Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey, him and the director of that movie, Rice Wake Waterfield, have now produced this one along with a few other movies based on royalty-free public domain properties. So here we have Mary Had a Little Lamb, and this one is directed by Jason Arber and stars Scott Jeffrey favourites May Kelly and Danielle Scott. And yes, it takes this well-known fairy tale nursery rhyme and converts it into a slasher movie. Now, this being a Scott Jeffrey produced movie, does that mean the plot is going to be a bunch of people go to a remote house and are chased around by some type of antagonist? Yes. That is exactly what it means, because that is the plot. But let me go into a little bit more context for you. So May Kelly plays Cara, and Kelly tends to be more of a supporting character in a lot of the previous kind of Scott Jeffrey produced movies. So here she is as our main character, and she's a kind of radio host or podcaster who does kind of like cold case crime stories and things like that. But she is having a rating slump and is told to improve her ratings by getting kind of more recent kind of, you know, cases, and she finds out that people have gone missing in these particular woods, and she goes there with a bunch of kind of her friends and colleagues to investigate why these people have gone missing, and they come across this elderly woman and eventually her son, who is a kind of Leatherface style kind of killer. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about Leatherface, and let's talk about the clear influence from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, this is a British movie, but it has a lot of characters doing American accents, so I'm not entirely sure where this is meant to be set, be it either in Britain or in America. I guess then you could call it's the unspecified location Chainsaw Massacre. That could be the alternative title for it. So yes, this is like a British movie. A lot of these kind of low-budget British movies get the actors to kind of put on American accents so they can kind of sell it abroad to appeal to American audiences, because apparently Americans don't like listening to British accents alone. But we're going to come on to those accents again, don't you worry. But let's talk about what I think works in this movie. For a slasher film, a low-budget slasher film, I actually think it's fine. You know, this works as a pretty standard low-budget slasher. You're pretty much going to get what you're expecting, I would say. But to go into a little bit more kind of detail, I have to say our kind of lamb, I guess, this kind of slasher, he looks pretty cool. I actually quite like the design here and the kind of the aesthetic of this big guy wearing this kind of like sheep costume as a kind of like, you know, it's a kind of like to hide his disfigured face that we're kind of told that he's kind of got. So I quite like the aesthetic. I'm not so keen on the kind of the sound effects that are massively overdone, but visually speaking, I think it's not bad. I would also say in the kind of the same vein here that there are some reasonable prosthetic makeup here in regards to some kind of wounds and things like this. And when we do see strikes coming down from, he tends to use an axe, but he does use a chainsaw in one scene. You know, he looks like he's coming down with some force, so it looks like you get, you know, a reasonable amount of kind of impact here. A couple of things I really did like in this movie. I have to say I thought the cinematography was actually probably above average compared to a lot of Scott Jeffrey produced movies. Now, these films are produced very quickly. They're produced quickly and cheaply. But it has to be said, the production team behind Scott Jeffrey's production company have got a reasonable amount of experience because they knock out so many films. So, you know, inevitably you've got some experience. And I was impressed with some of the kind of the cinematography here. We get some kind of nice tracking shots, kind of like what, you know, following our kind of travellers as they walk through these kind of like misty woods and things like that. There's some good use of kind of lighting and some shadows. So I have to say, I actually thought on a technical level it was relatively well shot. There's a little bit of shaky cam during the kind of the action sequences, but, you know, I have to say I was quite impressed. And there are some aspects here where I thought, wow, that's a really nice shot. Now, I don't know how many people would care about that, but, you know, I actually thought, having, you know, watched many films and doing reviews for them, I kind of appreciate when, you know, things are kind of well framed and things like this. Here's one aspect where I feel this movie elevated a lot of what is made from low budget kind of filmmakers in the slasher genre and the horror genre in general. One thing I actually would give props for in this movie is a small detail, but I liked it, and that's that our main character of Cara, played by Kelly, is not entirely altruistic. She actually kind of finds this older woman, and, you know, we're told that she's got a son, although we don't kind of like, they don't get to see him until obviously it's too late. But she kind of wants to manipulate them into making this a story, because she's desperate to kind of get a story out of this kind of like missing persons that she's out there investigating. And she doesn't know at this point they literally are the kind of like the reason there's missing persons. But she's quite happy to manipulate the kind of the facts to essentially rope this kind of family into this kind of story about these missing persons. So she's quite happy to you know, be unscrupulous for her own means, which I thought was an interesting idea here, and it makes the character seem nuanced and kind of not a, you know, goody two-shoes necessarily. You know, she has some kind of like some qualities that are a little bit underhanded, and equally I would say the mother in this house, we have like the mother Mary and her little lamb, her son. I have to say they did a good job here of making the mother seem somewhat sympathetic, because, you know, we're not going to go into spoilers here, but, and even the kind of, to a degree, the kind of like the Leatherface-esque kind of style killer. I mean, we've seen it before, how, you know, how Texas Chainsaw Massacre and even maybe Halloween and things like that, they, you know, we have our killers are set on their path by some sort of circumstances that were not their fault. But they did a reasonable job here of kind of like, you know, giving you this kind of context and some kind of backstory where I felt like you had some sympathy for these characters. I mean, especially I would say doing it to our protagonists, making them seem a little bit unscrupulous, I thought was interesting. I mean, we have seen, yes, tragic villains, you know, I appreciate it, but that has been done before, but less so the kind of our protagonists. So that aspect I kind of quite liked, to be honest with you. Now, there's we get a reasonable amount of red shirts that come to this kind of like this house, and you know, there's a reasonable amount of kind of kills in this movie. Nothing's especially explicit, I have to say, but there's a few okay kind of like, you know, gore effects and things like that. A lot of it is after the kind of the kill and stuff, which I'll come on to it again in just a second. But at least there's a reasonable amount of kills here for all you kind of like slasher fans and things like that. What doesn't work in this movie? Let's talk about the acting, and specifically the choice to have these American accents. Now, as I've said, this is a staple that a lot of low budget British movies do, and especially movies from Scott Jeffrey. May Kelly, I would say, does it reasonably well. I will give her that. Out of all the characters that do that, I think she does the best. Probably why she's the main character of this film, I would argue. There's a couple of times, specifically when she's kind of raising her voice towards the end of the movie, that it completely goes. And then there's a couple of other times you'll just hear the kind of the British accent kind of slip out. But for the most part, I thought she did a reasonable job of kind of portraying an American character. However, there are some other characters here, so let me be kind while I say this. Do not do a completely convincing American accent, and I will leave it at that in regards to the accent. But I have to say as well, there are some performances here that I felt were very wonky. For example, we have like out of the group of our protagonists, we have this like I don't even know what they're supposed to be. They're just kind of like clingers on, and there's this couple, and there's like they're like older, they look like they're in their 40s or something, but they act like teenagers. There's like this weird thing, like this 50-year-old bloke, I think he's the girl looks a little younger, acting like a horny 16-year-old teenager. I mean, they've just spent the night together, and they're like, oh, so someone's out the house, let's go and shag in someone else's house. It was just like, it looks weird. It looks kind of like, that doesn't look natural. And let me tell you, yeah, the accents aren't great. So there's some wonky performances, I have to say, from the smaller characters. But I have to say as well, I think this movie is a little bit too talky. You know, there are some moments where I thought it did well. As I've said, we get some context about, you know, the reasons that Mary and her son are the way they are. I thought that was good. And then we get some kind of like, as I say, some character moments with May Kelly's character, and she's kind of like we find out she's kind of manipulating things. But there's a lot of talky scenes in this. Just a little bit too many, and I think it slows the film down. And I think they should have been more horror elements. The kind of like the killing scenes could have been stretched out. They could have filmed to be a bit more kind of foreboding and scary, and a little bit more like something's out there, what is it kind of thing. Instead, it's very kind of like those sequences are quite kind of like put together on somewhat of a basic level, I would say. It's just a killer running around, you know, chasing people and things like that with horrible sound effects. A lot of the kills are off screen. I'm assuming this was probably a budget issue. I think they do it just a little bit too much, or I feel people would be a little bit irritated with it. So, you know, there is that. It's the same plot from every Scott Jeffrey movie. I mean, this has a writer, but I mean, it's just like, it's like a factory over there. They're knocking these like, oh, it's a bunch of, normally it's a bunch of girls. At least we have a couple of male characters here. But we know they're going to get kind of killed off. Heaven forbid we have a male protagonist in the Scott Jeffrey movie. But yeah, it's a bunch of people go to a house being chased around by something. It is the same plot in every single Scott Jeffrey movie. I don't even know why they bother having a writer, if I'm completely honest, because there's just it's this pace, you know, it's the same thing every single time. But I would say there is some enjoyment to be had. The killer looks cool. There are some reasonable kind of gore effects. It's well filmed. I think May Kelly does a fairly good job for a kind of a protagonist that has some interesting elements, and I have to say her performance was okay. And I like some of the kind of the character moments, especially with her and the Mary character, who is the mother. So this to me has a little bit of an uneven kind of scorecard, because there are some things here that are very generic, very, very generic. But there's a few highlights for me. But I think overall, how it shapes out ends up being somewhat of an average film, an average low-budget slasher film. So that's how I'll score this one, a 5 out of 10, which is my average score. So, would you see it? Have you seen it? Please do let me know all your thoughts on it, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time.